Hello. Today we are going to talk about one other way public is going to make its interests known and policy preference known and try to influence the government. Uh, we all seen that political parties are the most easily understandable and direct way to influence policy, perhaps the most powerful way to do so also. But another important aspect to understand from the input side uh, is the creation of interest groups um, within civil society. One of the common definition of civil society is this idea that it is the third aspect of society beyond the government and business. Some people might not agree with this definition because while it's important to have a separation between the ideas that there is a government and then the people are separate from it, I think business certainly is part of civil society. This idea that when Microsoft or Apple or Ford is trying to influence the government, it's part of civil society and it's not separate from the people. It is the human being doing these things. So people might not agree with this separation, but it is this idea that civil society consists of people who are outside government and also outside political parties. Conceptually, one may divide civil society into two larger categories, and the first one of this is social movements, with looser affiliation of people who have somewhat common goals. For example, the peace movements, the civil rights movements, women movements, gay rights movements. It's something quite broad. It's not something we really talk about being membership involved. It may at times be limited in goals. For example, if you are a student, if you as a student are unhappy with the tuition and that you are paying and then you drive down to state capital to complain about it, that would be a classic example of you acting as a civil society group, even if you do it only once. So you still part of these social movements. So social movements are very important to understand, but worthy enough of an entire course on their own and can be studied in such a way. Uh, I'm perfectly happy with students writing paper on social movements, but we are going to be focusing on interest groups, which are a little bit more narrower in definition. But if anybody wants to write a paper on social movements, that's perfectly fine. You should contact me in advance and I can give you things to read about and also help you understand social movement a bit better. But certainly, social movements are important and worth studying as well. But in this course, we are going to focus on on the more defined interest groups. Interest groups are, um, as I mentioned, uh, will be more defined and they will probably have a name and there will be membership. But whatever you say about interest group, they are like social movement, um, does not, but not like political party because you are not interested in winning office. You are not interested in your members being part of the government. You might not want to. You might you might want to influence the government, but you are not interested in actually running the government. Um, This results, in fact, in the fact that the leaders or maybe the members of interest groups are far less accountable to the general public. They don't have to be appealing, not like the politician that really can't afford to alienate. Well, um, you might be in a different era. You might find it difficult to understand for you guys because you have grown in an era where it's polarized politicians where they don't seems to quite care about the opposite side and quite content to call people on the other side names. But a standard politician is somebody who should be ready to reach out across the aisle and try to be appealing to everybody to get enough votes to be in the office. That is not necessary for someone in interest groups. Uh, they may be unappealing, they may say things which are divisive, hurtful, but that's fine because they are maybe simply want to represent their own organization and their own narrow interests. Um, Now, because of that, they are going to be uh, going to potentially act in a single minded, non compromising fashion. Mm, they do not need to bring together two different um, policies to get it passed in the House of Representatives or anything like that. No, they can they can be single-minded, uncompromising, and that make them sometimes difficult to work with. So, having the rough idea of interest group, let's talk about more in detail. By looking at the classification of interest group. There is two larger ways in which we can see interest group as most important types. The first one would be those that have some kind of economic goal in mind. This is why some people dislike the definition of civil society that takes business out of the civil society. They find business is part of civil society, so some of the economic interest groups would be first trade unions. These are Trade unions are representatives of workers in different branches organized along occupational lines like type of job you have got, truck drivers, or by industry, for example, metal industry, or along the regional lines like the New England Maple Growers Association or Hawaiian Pineapple Pickers Association, something like that. So the trade unions have an interest in representing their members' economic interest. Usually they want higher wages, secure wages, benefits, those kind of things. They generally have close ties with social democratic parties which are interested in workers' rights issues and redistribution issues. The other side of something working in partnership or working in conflict with trade union, you will find employers association or business association. These are made up of, let's say, car industry. They can be organized around just the employers' issues, like car manufacturers wanting to deal with labor issues, or it can be straightforward business association. These groups in US are rather undeveloped and tend to have when business gets developed, the employer gets organized. They tend to do it per business basis. If, for example, if Ford or GMC wants to do something, they will lobby politicians directly. They will take them out to lunch. They will go to Washington, D.C. and lobby for change directly. In most other settings, certainly in Europe, what tends to happen is that certain industries come together under an association. So it will be car manufacturer association. So you have Ford and GMC together under an umbrella organization. For example, say Germany, you have Audi, Volkswagen, BMW, or Mercedes Benz, Opel, all of them trying to have a bigger impact by working together. Now, in the US again, we have a tradition of individualism, and group don't really like to work together that much. So it's more distrustful society, and so that has kind of fallen apart. In most other parts of the world, these employers associations or business associations are very important as interest groups, and very powerful. And not to say in US business community is not powerful. No, it's not saying that. In US business community is powerful, but it's just not organized in the same way. It's much more individualistic. In other way, you may be organized economically, but also the other way of our interest groups are professional associations. Say, for example, bar association, medical professions association, and things like that, organized professionally, wanting to see the interest of their profession pushed forward within the legislation. So these are some of the economic interest groups. The other type of interest group would be those that are based not necessarily on economic but on certain rights. So the classic one in United States, the rights to bear arms, those that envision what the Second Amendment means. There you got National Rifles Association (NRA). You got American Association of Retired People (AARP). You might have groups such as Amnesty International, Greenpeace, and things like that. These are the standard non-government organization you think about when you have very narrow interest, right, just the one interest or policy area or one area of constituency. Like AARP is medical care, is social security assured for older people, such kind of questions. Now, organized religion is also sometimes an interest group. Obviously, it may not be organized to be that group uh, that tries to push for certain rights. That's true, but many times they act politically. The organization set up very much like any other interest group. For that reason, if anybody interested in writing about influences of church, or researching about that little bit, I think you can study organized religion in the same way as you would any other kind of interest group. So that's kind of the brief descriptive side of interest group. I think we will better understand what we mean by interest group. So now let's talk a little bit about what kind of things, like structural things, meaning about about a particular society or countries. What factors about the way that country is might affect the way the interest groups act in that society. Uh, there are four different considerations to understand uh, this, the way the structural factors affect interest group. The first one is the rules of the game, the basic rules of the game, the basic institutional rules that exist in a society. That sounds very vague, but soon you will get them. First thing is, are there guaranteed for freedom of speech, freedom of association? Interest groups are not going to be able to say very much in a society where you can be thrown in jail for protesting about treatment of animals. You are going to be able to organize, no, not going to be able to organize very well.